This 150-year-old cookbook has a beautiful illustration of a gingerbread house. Or so I thought, but the book says it's made of gum paste, which is like fondant that sets really hard. It's not nice to eat. I'm going to try and make this design out of gingerbread and figure out when gingerbread houses were invented and why we make them at Christmas. I like my gingerbread dough with lots of spices. So if you want my recipe, I'll put all the details of that on the How to Cook That website. There's a link in the description. I can't find any mention of ginger or gingerbread houses in the Bible, so this tradition has nothing to do with baby Jesus or the real meaning of Christmas. The earliest recipe for gingerbread that I could find was from 1450, but it's made from honey, grated bread, saffron, pepper, cloves and sandalwood. Nothing like what I'm making. Lots of old cookbooks do have gingerbread recipes in them, like this one that says pour the mixture into a greased tin and bake. It's a cake recipe. It's not a stiff dough that can be rolled out like the one that we're doing here. Nuremberg in Germany is the self-proclaimed capital of gingerbread. In the 15th century, the monks there even established a guild to regulate gingerbread production. And if you weren't part of the guild, well, you weren't allowed to make gingerbread, except at Christmas and Easter, which makes me wonder if that's why it's eaten at Christmas. But the monks' original recipe there was a mixture of honey, ground nuts, citrus peels, spices, and it had little or no flour at all, so the batter was so sticky that it had to be baked on rice paper wafers. And there's no mention of gingerbread houses historically there either. The house that I'm attempting to make today did not have a template. The book just said before constructing it, each part should be planned out in cardboard and the paste afterwards cut out from these cardboard patterns. So thanks a lot, that's not much help there. So I've taken the time to design the template for you and put that on my website. Now we just need to cut out all of these pieces from gingerbread. If you do need a straight edge on a piece, leave a border of gingerbread in place while it bakes, but if not, if you want rounded edges, remove the border straight away. Apparently, in the 16th century, Queen Elizabeth I had gingerbread men baked in the likeness of her guests as gifts. And at around the same time, Shakespeare wrote a comedy that was performed for the Queen, in which one of the characters said, "If I had but 1 penny in the world, thou shouldst have it to buy gingerbread." So the Queen obviously liked gingerbread, but in my quest to find the first mention of a gingerbread house, I started looking through gingerbread recipes in old cookbooks to find one that would be suitable. The earliest written recipe that I could find in English for this style of gingerbread was from 1780. It has treacle, eggs, brown sugar, ginger, lots of other spices, butter, and as much flour as will knead into a very stiff paste. And it says to roll it out and cut it into what form you please. But again, there's no mention of using this to make a gingerbread house. If you search online for the history of gingerbread houses, everyone just seems to have the same story, which tends to mean they're all copying one source. And all that does is talk about the history of ginger and then skips forward in time and says gingerbread houses were popularised by the publication of the story of Hansel and Gretel. So I went back and read the original 1812 story in Grimm's Fairy Tales. Now, their book also has lots of other fairy tales in it, like Rapunzel, and they didn't make up all of these. The story of Hansel and Gretel apparently originated back in 1315, where bad weather in Europe caused crop failures and a long, devastating famine. The price of wheat tripled, making bread, which was the staple food, unaffordable for a lot of people, and so people had nothing to eat. In one recorded incident, even the king found it difficult to get bread to feed himself and his entourage. So if the king is finding it hard to get food, you can imagine how the poor people are finding it. It's estimated that between 10 and 15% of the population died. Now, given that context, let's read a section of the story where the starving children, Hansel and Gretel, are abandoned and wandering lost in the woods. On the third day, they went again until midday, and that's when they saw a little house. It was built entirely of bread and was covered with cakes, or the side note there says pancakes, and the windows were of light sugar. So unlike the modern movie adaptations that show a house made of gingerbread and covered in chocolate and candy, this house was made of bread, the thing that people who were starving were longing for so that they wouldn't die. So it's a bit unclear how that popularised gingerbread houses at the time. And even if it did popularise gingerbread houses, that would mean they were being made prior to that. So we still don't know who started this whole thing. So next I started searching other old documents for anything that had the words gingerbread and house in the same document. And I found some interesting things, like a court case where a squib or a firework was thrown on Fair Day and landed on a gingerbread stall, and the owner of the stall, to save his wares, threw it across the market house onto another gingerbread stall, the owner of which, with the like objective, threw it again, and it struck the plaintiff in the head. That sounds like a crazy scene from a cartoon, not real life, but it actually happened. There were also a few other documents that talked about gingerbread houses as a style of architecture, but the oldest document I could find with reference to an edible gingerbread house was a story in a magazine from 1896 that was written by Sarah Orne Jewett, and it says, "On the table was a model of the old Bowden house, made of a durable gingerbread, with all the windows and doors in the right places, and sprigs of genuine lilac set at the front. It must have been baked in sections in one of the last great brick ovens and fastened together on the morning of the day. There was a general sigh when this fell into ruin at the feast's end, and it was shared by a great part of the assembly, not without seriousness, and as if it were a pledge and a token of loyalty. I met the maker of the gingerbread house, which had called up lively remembrances of a childhood story. She had the gleaming eye of an enthusiast and a look of high ideals. I could just as well have made it all of frosted cake," she said, "but 'twouldn't have been the right shade. The old house, as you observe, was never painted, and I concluded that plain gingerbread would represent it best. It wasn't all that I expected it would be," she said sadly, as many an artist had said before of his work. I also have a problem with my gingerbread house. Remember how I made this base hollow? Well, it's not strong enough to hold the weight of this massive house. So now you can see the outer archways are buckling as the centre has dropped down. I ended up lifting the whole thing off and adding a jar into the centre right down on the baseboard for support, and then putting it all back on again so that it didn't fall over. I just had to cover up the cracks on the archways with more leaves. And now I'm going to hand the gingerbread house search over to you guys, particularly anyone who's watching in Germany, because if gingerbread houses did start in Germany, it would make sense that the historical documents relating to them would be written in German. And if you do manage to find any documents about gingerbread houses that were published prior to 1896, let us know all the details in the comments, in English preferably. With thanks to my patrons for your support of this channel over this year, I hope you all have an amazing Christmas. God bless, and I'll see you in the new year.